The latest imprisonment of Payton Gendron in the racist mass shooting that killed 10 people in Buffalo has now prompted conversations about a social issue that America has been dealing with for decades. We are talking about racism in America. According to data, the United States of America is among the worst countries for racial equality. To talk about racism in America and why such crimes are on a rise, we're now being joined by Calvin Dark, a global affairs commentator from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Dark.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the Buffalo shooting is the latest example of targeted racial violence. I want to first start by asking you, what is causing an uptick in hate crimes in America?
Well, I think that the horrific situation in Buffalo was a recent example, but it wasn't the most recent. These are incidents that are happening on a massive scale almost every day here in the United States. The reason why we're seeing this uptick is because the United States as a society, we haven't dealt with fundamental issues of racism that stem from slavery and Jim Crow and the vital civil rights that has been a challenge in our country for almost since our beginning. So the uptick is due to the fact that we haven't dealt with those issues the way that we should. And when you don't deal with those types of issues, they don't go away. They become more exacerbated, and that's what I think we're seeing now.
Right, just apart from the issues that you've listed, the factors that you've listed, I also want to bring in a point that is the uptick in racist killings because of the replacement theory, which is a racist idea that outlines how white people are being replaced by people of color in America. And so to add that Payton Gendron also said that the killings were driven by the replacement theory.
Well, racists have always had theories of how they feel threatened. So whether it's the replacement theory or the Ku Klux Klan or whatever, that doesn't justify what they do. And frankly, it doesn't really matter in terms of how we solve it, because those people who are racist are going to find a justification in their racism. But I think one thing that we can point to specifically that's really exacerbating the problem is we have a current backlash against teaching our history, against teaching African-American authors and pioneers in our history in our school system, particularly in Florida with Governor Ron DeSantis, but not just him, many others. That's feeding into it because it's feeding into those who look for reasons to commit racist acts and to enact and strengthen racist policies.
And can this racial attitude be changed in any way?
Well, you know, there's only so much that laws can do. Laws can't change hearts and they can't change minds, but they can dissuade people from acting on those things. And that's what we need to focus on. A lot of times, especially in the United States, people say, well, you know, what law could make someone like someone the way that they should? The law can't, but the law can make them think twice before they commit an act against someone because of racist thoughts, be it violence or be it in the workplace, showing preference for one race or another, or just in the street, continuing some of the racist actions that we've seen. So laws can't do it all, but they can do a lot.
So in your viewpoint, do you think that the current laws in America are sufficient to deal with racism? And if not, then what is the way out of it?
We've made a lot of progress in our legal system and how to fight racism, but we could go much further. One instance in particular is in policing and addressing the epidemic of police brutality against African Americans. There have been laws that have been passed by the Democrats in the House, and it didn't pass in the Senate because of Republicans. So that's just one area where if Republicans were really interested in solving this, they could join with Republicans and we could pass laws that would help with police brutality. And that would be a step towards addressing the other issues in our society that are based in racism, such as economic disparities and other many areas.
Also, I want to ask you as to exactly what is inside America's social fabric. The United States of America was once known for its rich communal and civic life. But now, violence against people of color and racist slurs are being hurled at black people, for that matter, even at Indians.
Yes, but now we have to remember that that is not anything new. That's been happening in our country, in the United States, we have often had is racism against minorities, but then a very vibrant public square. Because we're seeing this uptick, it means that there are things that need to be addressed, but it's not as if this is a new phenomenon. This is something that we've had to deal with for a long time, including my parents, who weren't able to go to school with white people. The university I went to that I absolutely love wasn't even open to my father if he had wanted to go when he graduated from high school. So it's nothing new, but it is something that we need to address.
Right. I also want to seek your inputs regarding a recent incident where Ann Coulter, a renowned American commentator, passed a racist jibe at Nikki Haley. She said, "Go back to your own country." Do you think the problem of racism is systemic in America?
Yes, of course. That is nothing new. What we have seen against Nikki Haley is the same thing that we see a lot every day. Think about Barack Obama, who was harassed throughout his eight years as president because people said that he wasn't American, and that was championed by the person who won the election after President Obama's term. So this is nothing new. It's something that we've all had to face and that we all need to deal with.
Right. Just to add to that, racism continues to be pervasive in America, from Barack Obama to Nikki Haley to even the anecdote that you mentioned about your parents. I want to ask you as to what factors contribute to racism in the United States of America at the moment.
Well, I think a lot of what we see about racism in this country is because our laws have been built around a system of racism. For example, in economics, there was the practice of redlining, where certain areas where black people and minorities lived weren't able to get mortgages. And that happened just 40, 50 years ago. So that actually impacts people my age who are struggling, maybe to get mortgages, to get treated fairly economically. And so, a lot of times people say, well, maybe the U.S. system doesn't work. The thing is, it does work. It works as it was designed to work, to favor those who are not minorities. What we have to do is change this system to give everyone a fair chance, but that's going to take the commitment of all of our policymakers from both sides, Democrat and Republican, to really address and face these issues of racism that have existed for a long time.
Right. There is also this stereotypical notion of black men as criminals in America. I want to seek your inputs on that, and when will this perception change?
That's very true. I live here in Washington, D.C., and I've even had a situation where I was stopped and handcuffed because they thought I was someone else. This is something that happens all the time in the United States. A lot of times people think it's happening more. That's just because we have cameras, that we now have proof of what people have been saying for decades and for generations. Now, when it comes to why that is or how we can stop it, that's where laws come into place. Now, when it comes to changing people's perceptions, law enforcement officers about what threat or supposed threat black men possess, that's something that the law can't do. But the law can put in place consequences so that people will think twice before they treat someone differently, particularly black men, because of the danger they perceive that is based in systemic racism.
My last question to you before I let you go, Mr. Dark. How can racism and alleged police brutality in the U.S. be brought to an end?
It can be brought to an end if we pass legislation at the federal level to make sure that police are held accountable for their actions, to make sure there's transparency whenever there are issues where a person of color or anyone actually is killed or stopped or threatened because of suspected crimes. But once again, we have a very big challenge in our system because Republicans don't want to tackle that issue. But if they did, that's one way we could really seriously address it.
Thank you for joining us, WION, at this hour, Mr. Dark, and sharing your insights on this. Thanks very much.
Thank you.